How's it going, folks?
Good.
It's a small crowd, so I think we can be pretty informal here. So kind of what I want to talk about today is the role of debating on university campuses and how and college campuses, and how for about a century now, there's been a turn inward. And that has produced some strange results that are now producing a turn outward. I think it's helpful to know history. So you probably heard of high schools and colleges and universities where they have a debate team, right? Mm-hmm. And depending on your exposure to this, you probably have some ideas about what that's likely to look like. Most of the time, people who are familiar with academic debating are familiar with this sort of very fast talking, highly stylized, almost bizarre kind of debate that the average citizen, I think, would be hard-pressed to recognize as public discourse or civic discourse. But that debating on college campuses has not always been that way. In the beginning of the 20th century, most high school debating, college debating, was of the kind that you saw. Has anyone seen the movie The Great Debaters, where it's just one school would challenge another to one of these exhibition debates? And this was a really great thing for civic engagement, for public engagement, public life. Basically what happened is school after school, the Ivies, the HBCUs, back at the beginning of the 20th century really didn't have state schools in the way that we do now, but colleges and universities around the country would challenge each other to debates on an issue of importance in the day. Debating in San Luis Obispo County sort of began in the early 20th century with the opening of Cal Poly. Cal Poly debate team is actually one of the oldest organizations in the area that has a long-standing debate program out of high schools or colleges, and it's existed since 1902 all the way to now. And Cal Poly has gone through this change over the course of time. And so I think it's interesting to see where our local civic debating in terms of colleges has been, where it's ended up. So what used to happen is these school-to-school exhibition debates, there'd be someone there to record a transcript of them, and there would be compilations of these transcripts that would be published by publishing houses and released to the general public, and members of the general public actually would purchase these and would read about the debates of the day and what were the ideas coming out of universities and colleges. Today that doesn't really happen as much as it once did. In fact, it doesn't really happen at all. The reason that it doesn't happen is that, for whatever reason, in the early and mid-20th century, the thirst for public discourse was really quite high. I think it's because that was a time when there wasn't we weren't so media saturated. We weren't constantly being exposed to pundits on TV. We also didn't have a lot of media that just regurgitated our own points of view back to us. And so there was a lot of student demand for debating. So these debate teams, people would come and they would try to join them, so they would get more and more talented students that wanted to participate in these things. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that if you just had these exhibition debates, you weren't going to be able to serve as many students as were demanding the ability to practice their advocacy skills, their oratory skills, and their research skills. Now, why is it that students were demanding to be a part of these programs has a lot to do with professional development. Students tried to become parts of debate teams because it was an opportunity mostly to learn oratory and to learn research skills, which helped them in their careers. They viewed that as a boon to their careers, or a boon to getting into grad school for students that wanted to follow the path to grad school. On a debate team, you're highly likely to be doing graduate level research as an undergrad, which would make a good argument for you being allowed into grad school or something like that. You can look at the history of all of this. John Reif talks about it a lot, but you can see it on the speechanddebate.org website. I don't want to get too much into that, but what happens then is that the people who run these programs, they come up with this idea of a debate tournament, which hadn't really existed before then. And what these debate tournaments end up looking like is multiple schools with multiple teams of people within each school come to these tournaments, and they have week-long debating events. These sorts of events tend to be judged by people. Well, we can look at it. So debaters basically speak for former debaters who act as judges at these tournaments. So it gets a little bit solipsistic. where it's like debaters talking to debaters about debate, sort of explaining to other debaters why they think they should win the round, it really becomes more of a game than an exercise in civic discourse. And the result of that is that your argumentation strategy gets more specialized. Instead of thinking about what types of arguments would be persuasive to a member of the public, debaters start thinking about like, well, what types of arguments and strategies are going to be persuasive to people who've been through the activity? And these sort of norms develop where if you drop an argument, it's counted against you, whereas the public might not necessarily do that. When we talk about dropping an argument, we mean not engaging with it. Like a team will make an argument and the other team will just ignore it. In the gamification space, that oftentimes is interpreted as that was a winning argument. But, you know, in the public sphere, you might ignore an argument because it was just stupid, you know, and it's just not worth it. Like, you might get up and be like, I'm just not going to engage that. That's a terrible thing to talk about. And that strategy might be persuasive in the public sphere in a way that it isn't in the debate sphere. Bizarre speaking styles emerge. I'll show you these bizarre speaking styles if you're not familiar with them. And then there's a turn toward a type of argument that we call critique. And critique is basically, it's actually a really important and good type of argument, but it gets abused in the circuit. Critique is what happens when you start criticizing the way that people are using language in their arguments and like ideologies that underlie that and power imbalances, or critiquing, offering criticisms of the activity of debate itself as mostly a white male masculine space rather than an inclusive space, these are of course great arguments to have, but what these arguments end up doing is they end up making debate a discussion about what debate is and what debate should be, rather than a discussion of what it is that we're supposed to be debating a lot of the time. There are lots of schools that have been extremely successful using this format of argument. I don't want to poo-poo that form of argument. I think it is an important form of argument, and there are places in which we should have it, but there are some unfortunate side effects to having that form of argument in which people start focusing more on criticizing rather than constructing a lot of the time, constructing new arguments and engagement with the topic. Or the ideas that the people who set the motions were trying to forward as an educational exercise. So this sort of like results in some important rivalries and starts actually, these rivalries sort of like end up in what I'm going to describe as like an elite flight or a white flight kind of atmosphere inside of the debate community. Circuits bifurcate, people start new formats. And this is sort of like the history of how debating on college campuses happens. Most debate programs started as these spaces where, okay, we're going to engage these other schools, we're going to have these debates, we're going to invite an audience of outsiders in, and there's going to be some way that we devised to pick a winner. Usually the audience would vote to determine who they thought was going to be the winner. And then it moves away from that to this tournament circuit stuff. And then the tournament circuit creates a culture that starts to eat itself. And that culture doesn't really engage with the outside world much. You don't really see a lot of exhibition debates or show debates or things like that. Some of the outcomes of this, because we don't have academic debating visible out there in the community, so that there's no standard by which to judge what a substantive debate looks like, we see that negatively affecting our politics. Because there's nobody out there sort of demonstrating what rigorous academic debate looks like, our politicians have reframed what we call academic debating, or not academic debating, but political debating or presidential debating. They've sort of distorted that into a series of like competing press conferences. If you watch our civic discourse now, it's like politicians talking past each other and not really engaging with each other on issues, and it's basically like just getting up there and trying to rally your base to vote for you instead of actually exploring what would be the best policies. I think because we don't have any spaces that are really modeling academic debating, it's easier for them to get away with this. I think that's a net negative to our society. So gamification sort of results in this type of behavior. How do we make this play? This should work.
Down there it says autoplay is off, maybe?
No, that should be for the...
Okay. Oh.
There we go.
Our critique of multi-president discourse stability is a crucial contribution to coalescing and militarization with cities means domination of the global winner.
Presence in Africa, decolonial ethics supposes the fallacy of American ethical intervention of the U.S.
Asian woman, I mean, custom made truck.
Didn't help on demonic process.
Instead of resolution, what percent
Most basic trigger only two carry nodes in only two nodes in this network, but there are sites to examine this places where the apparatus of military power torches the ground.
So, yeah, the faces that are being made in the audience, if anyone's watching this video over here, they're probably similar to the face that you just had. So this is what happens when you sort of have people who are no longer, I guess, concerned as much with trying to speak in a way that would be recognizable as civic discourse to most folks. And it's sort of what happens when you enter into a solipsistic advocacy discourse community where it's like, we're only talking to ourselves, so we start talking in shorthand, we start developing strange speaking habits because we understand them, but the outside community doesn't, and that sort of serves to sever debate communities from the wider population even more and more and more. It makes the activity truly elitist, hard to access, and only people who have training in how to do it end up being able to access it in ways that are meaningful to them. The rest of the community is pushed out. And that's, either a boon or a problem depending on how you think of it and what you think of it. But at its absolute worst are these rivalries. And sometimes these rivalries, back in, I think this is 2007 or 2008, these rivalries came to a head with this exchange.
Is it bullshit? Yeah, it's bullshit. It's bullshit.
Yeah,
Your anger is bullshit.
I'm angry.
You are. You fucking look at this kid while he's sitting on the table shaking his head. Give a fucking comment to me. It's not your place.
Oh, it's not my place to respond to that? And what are you doing? What are you doing? You're fucking saying so much wrong.
Yes, because I'm a fucking girl and we
You're a
fucking
fucking girl. I want to. I heard Melissa speak about that.
Exactly.
Exactly. So I can.
You get the fucking
Why don't I get the fucking fuck? I'm a fucking asshole. I know it. I am a fucking asshole. I know it. I don't know. You want to show it to me? I am an asshole. I embrace my being an asshole. Oh, I'm not. Oh, yeah. Fuck you.
Fuck you.
I'm not nice time.
So this is absurd. This is absurd conflict over something that people had essentially at that point turned into a game for I guess their own purposes, their own professional purposes. People get emotionally invested. That was a very highly competitive, if you're a member of the community, I guess you would say important debate round, and that the people there were both faculty members. Those weren't students going after each other, those were faculty members. So it became pretty clear somewhere in the mid to late 2000s that we were having a crisis. There was something wrong here, and there's been all kinds of attempts to try to engage these problems and solve them. A lot of what ends up happening is what I would call alphabet soup. Each one of these collections of letters represents a debate organization that has spun off of the initial policy debate circuits that we had here in the country to try to solve. So the NDT was the classic policy debate circuit, the national debate tournament. If you were doing NDT, you had to go around to a bunch of tournaments, you had to try to win a certain number of rounds at each tournament to collect points. If you collected enough points, you were allowed to go to the NDT. People said that was too elitist, so then they spun off CETA, which was the people's tournament, and anyone could go to CETA Nationals and compete, and that was deemed a nice thing. But those same problems existed because it was a community of debaters talking to debaters that encouraged this type of fast talking, that encouraged these type of rivalries. Of course, then we get spin-offs like the American Parliamentary Debate Association or the National Parliamentary Debate Association or the United States Universities Debate Association, which I was one of the founding members of. I don't even remember what the NSDA means anymore. International Parliamentary Debate Association. I don't remember what PRP stands for anymore. But there's just every time folks are like, well, we're just gonna go do something else, but they never solve the problem. And I think that the core problem is that all of these organizations remain in that solipsistic mode of debate people talking to debate people about debate arguments and why their particular style of debating should be rewarded as compared to other styles of debating. And what that does is it's kind of like, people attribute this quote to Einstein. I'm not sure if it's an Einstein quote, but like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting to get different results. That's what's going on here, is people are doing the same thing over and over and they expect to get different results. Now, I'm not going to tell you that there aren't good reasons to be a member of any one of these organizations. Each one of these organizations have lots of value to offer students. I think if you're getting the value out of those organizations that your program is seeking or that your institution is seeking for them, the policy debate community gives you absolutely excellent research skills. Parliamentary debate communities focus more on oratory skills rather than research skills. These are both great things, but for a long time, at least 10 years, I've been grappling with the question of like, well, how do we do both? How do we actually get people to do good research, learn a lot about a topic, get a lot of debating in, but not end up in this weird speech bubble that's full of anger and resentment and things like that. And a couple years ago, I started having conversations with Paul Hayes from George Washington University and Ken Newby at Morehouse College and Steve Yano at St. John's University in Queens, New York. And these guys were all wrestling with the same question that I was, is like, how do we get out of this mode? If I'm going to devote a career to teaching oratory and civic engagement, how do we actually bring this back around to oratory and civic engagement? And so we think we have a solution. We have to turn away from this audience of dedicated technician with diverse goals, because they're always going to maneuver for power over the activity. They're always going to try to use loopholes and techniques and strategies to dominate, to get trophies, and the quest for trophies becomes an end in and of itself. What we want to do is return to the rhetoric. And so what we're looking for is a type of academic debating that has to do with audience analysis and engaging different audiences on different issues that are important to them, so that we have to learn about their communities, what's considered a good idea, good evidence, good argumentation, good oratory in their communities, and have them tell us if what we're doing is of value for them. So we're creating a format of debate where audience analysis drives the speech, and this is probably going to solve for weird speech norms, because if people outside of the community are judging what we're doing, we have to meet their needs rather than sort of turning inward and being in our own weird little cocoon. So civic debating starts somewhere around 2013. The George Washington University and the French Embassy revive the Lafayette debates. The original Lafayette debates were held in 1824 when General Lafayette's grandson, I believe, came to visit the George Washington University, and he debated, I think he debated his father in front of the congregation there for people who were interested. So now we have an event that's been revived, and this event of the Lafayette debates is judged by diplomats, by academics who are experts in the field of that the topic under study or up for debate is being forwarded. They're experts in that. And because they are practitioners or academic experts, but they're not debate experts, we get feedback from them that talks about things like, well, I understand why that argument's appealing, but here's why it doesn't actually end up working that way when we try to implement a policy like that. We start getting feedback like, well, one of the coolest pieces of feedback that we got was a few years ago. One of our students was speaking at the Morehouse Social Justice Debates at Morehouse College in Atlanta, and their round was being judged by a judge, like an actual judge, like a dude with a law degree, and like sits on a bench and wears the robe, right? Like they were being judged by an actual justice, and we were forwarding arguments about why it is that sentencing reforms would be the most meaningful thing that you could do to protect communities from loss of human capital, loss of actual monetary capital, and things like that. And this judge told our students, he said, you know, you made, well, I don't remember exactly what the argument was that they made, but his feedback to them was, you made an argument in there that I hadn't considered since grad school, and I think I need to rethink the way that I approach sentencing because of that argument. And so this is undergraduate students talking to professionals who are then thinking about the arguments that they made and really rethinking how they do their profession. We had a similar experience last year. We went to a debate, the John Peter Zenger First Amendment debates, hosted by one of the Society of Professional Journalists regional conferences. Journalists left the final round of that debate, came up to our students and told us that some of the thoughts that our students had forwarded about why would truth be more important than balance, or balance be more important than truth in reporting, they came and said, we really hadn't thought about these things since J school, since journalism school, and this seems like really important, and more journalists should be thinking about these kinds of ideas and thinking about the ethics of their practice. And they said it was a really great event because it forced them to rethink their approach to the practice of their profession. So one of the things that I think is really cool about this turn to the civic is that when we actually start trying to find, when we cast aside the quest for trophies, when we stop worrying about whether or not we bring home the best trophy, whether or not we go to the right amount of tournaments to please the right judges, and we just start finding communities who are in need of some kind of debate and have that debate for them as outsiders, we can come in and we can tell them things that if it was an insider telling them that, it would become a personal fight. But if it's two outside groups who have no dog in the fight, are just like, here are the arguments, we're gonna execute the arguments for you and you'll have to decide what works. People, and because they think it's an educational exercise for the students, they're able to step out of their normative boxes of thinking and take a good look at arguments that they maybe would dismiss if it was coming from an equal. And so it offers some really cool some really cool opportunities for students to have some major effects in association with what is essentially a co-curricular, or in some instances an extracurricular activity. I think that's pretty neat. So there's some demand for this that we discover, is that not only do students seem to like it, but also there's a bunch of communities that once they learn about what we're doing, they're like, we want this too. And so things have really started to blow up. As demand has increased here, we have a whole slate from October through April of this year of different events being judged by different communities. And so we have this What We Owe Each Other debates. This was in Bogota, Colombia. Students from America went down and partnered with Colombian students to speak about issues regarding the governance of Colombia. Local lawmakers, local academics, local policy experts came out to hear the debates and respond to them. It was a really great event. The St. Ignatius Dialogues at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles just engaged issues of homelessness and hunger, which, if you know anything about what's going on in Southern California right now, homelessness and hunger, very important. We have one-person no-vote deliberations at Emory University in Atlanta about voting rights, obviously something very important, especially in southern states, but throughout the United States. Criminal justice reform, social justice, military policy and climate change and security, humanitarian law. All sorts of different topics are being forwarded at these tournaments. And you know, I use the word tournament, but I use it loosely. It still uses a tournament format to select who's going to be in the final round, talking to the experts. Like, we still do have some of the, like, hey, debate people talking to debate people, but it's not former students anymore. It's the coaches are getting together and being like, okay, what do we think is going to make the best argumentation and the best oratory for the audience that we're ultimately going to have to present to. And that just changes the feedback, that changes the judging that comes from debate professionals. So, the advantages to this kind of pedagogy are twofold. First is just that it's accessible. There's no weird skills to learn. You don't have to learn extra sophisticated, hyper technical argumentation. You just need to be able to read good information about the topic and help students decipher which of those arguments are the best arguments and which are the weakest. Any faculty member who can critically assess a speech can be of use. to students in this format of debate. Any student capable of delivering a speech and thinking critically can participate. There's no weird skill building that is highly specialized. And honestly, I think the coolest thing on this front is just networking with practicing professionals. There's going to be a lot of students who are going to get connected to internships and first jobs and things of that nature as a result of participating in this sort of thing. The second advantage, and this is I think important for community colleges, is it lowers costs. A lot of these traditional formats of debate have a long tournament circuit slog that you have to sort of run through in order to get to the final round, and to be able to report to your administration, hey, we spent all this money and we have a result from that. You can go to a civic debate conference event and you can lose spectacularly and still come back and tell administration, this is what the students learned. This is who they interacted with. These were the learning outcomes for them, and they're tangible. It's not just like a rehashing of, well, we won this trophy at this tournament, we had X many points, so we were this seed, and there's none of this technical stuff. It's just, this is the solid learning that went on. It's easy for administrators to understand. It's also easy for the students to understand. It's really a huge boon. Fewer targeted events means more students benefit from one study trip. Whereas like debate budgets before, you might spend all of your money on your top 2 or 4 debaters, getting them to tournaments, and using the other debaters in the background to be researchers to help them execute their arguments. This means any student on the team can probably find a way to access the ability to go participate in an event. There's an online component, which means that students that don't get selected for travel still can engage with students from other schools and judges from other places. So that they're getting much more of a strong educational experience that's diverse rather than just the same day-to-day being judged by and interacting with the same people all the time. And because you're practicing to go to events away, there can be an intramural component on campus where you have the same debate, but you have debates on campus, and anyone can participate and take part in an intramural tournament, or you can have sort of like intramural events off campus. One of the things that we've been doing with the Cal Poly debate team for some time now we have a sort of standing agreement with Dark Nectar Coffee House up in Atascadero, where they bring us in to do exhibition debates, and the community will tell the debaters everything they think is wrong with their arguments, which is, I think, a great way to help them prepare. Student reactions, they're pretty positive. Things that I'll point out here. They point out extensive research to knowledgeably discuss all sides of the issue. Really requires people to learn how to do good research. This sort of stuff is really important. This student here, Megan Boyd, says that she was able to recall information from a debate that she had 2 years ago in one of her graduate classes, and I think that seems like a pretty cool thing. Here's another quote from a graduate of our debate program at Cal Poly. Where he says, he likes the serious academic rigor, he likes its reliance on pre-prepared topics chosen in consultation with scholars. It's not just like people in a room being like, I think this would be a fun debate to have. It's like literally figuring out, is this a debate that needs to have happen? Apparently in some of these sort of like more extemporaneous debate formats, novelty over rigor has been the key to setting topics, like how are we gonna wow people? But I like this idea here that education takes place even after the debate is over. Rather than being judged by fellow undergraduates, civic debate tournaments are judged by people with real-world experience. So students are picking up on what's valuable here, and I think that that's really good. So what does this mean for Cuesta College, right? Because while I'm a faculty member here, this is mostly based off of my experience as the debate coach for Cal Poly. Well, here's what I think is important for Cuesta College. We've already held our first debate event in that civic adjacent category. So Allison Phelps and I helped to organize this event. The room was packed. It was a small room, but it was a packed room. People seemed interested in the topic. It was a healthcare debate. Students both debated and judged. The Cal Poly debate team has already partnered with Hancock College for Spanish language debates. That's something that we could reproduce here at Cuesta. In fact, this Friday at 2:30 p.m., we're going to go down to Hancock Santa Maria campus. It'd be much easier to come to Cuesta, it's just down the road. But and then our English division holds multiple public debates at Dark Nectar Coffee House and things like that. I have, over the course of the past 4 years teaching here, I think it's been 4 years now, at least 3, multiple students every year approach me and say, oh, I'd love to do debating here on the Cuesta campus. How do we make this happen? And I think Allison gave us our best first window into this, which is just approach people and say, I want to have a debate. And then if you approach people and say, I want to have a debate, and then you get hooked up with either Allison or I, we'll make that happen. We'll figure out how to get you a forum, and we'll figure out how to make sure that you're trained to deliver the best possible oratory for your event. So that's kind of the long and short about civic debating. The big idea here is that when colleges don't participate in demonstrating to the community what a good debate looks like, I think that it's bad for both the community and the debate circuit, or the debate, I guess we call it the debate community and the wider community. I think both communities suffer from not engaging with each other. I think they suffer, I think the debate community suffers from the things that I showed you examples of, just sort of like the anger and resentment that builds as rivalries start to develop. And then I think also just like a lot of time and effort is spent learning very esoteric skills that maybe aren't going to translate that well out into a professional life. I think there's a lot of skills that do translate in terms of research and in terms of critical thinking, but certainly some of the oratory stuff there is a problem. And in the other formats of debate where perhaps there's not as much academic rigor in setting and executing motions, the downfalls there are, of course, that people don't learn those research skills. They instead sort of learn how to become what I would describe as charismatic bullshitters who are capable of sounding great while not saying much of anything, or they become very good at like fibbing their way through or fudging their knowledge in order to score rhetorical points that aren't really necessarily backed with good information. And so those, I think, are two strong downfalls that so far civic debating seems to be avoiding. So that's my spiel. I don't, if folks have questions, I'd be happy to answer questions. If folks do not have questions, that is also fine.
I did have a question about, is there an online component to, because I was thinking about the audience problem, how you're basically attracting your own.
Yes.
So have they ever thought about creating an online audience sort of to interact so that you have sort of more?
Yeah, so what we're experimenting with right now, we just, for the Columbia event, we had online practice rounds as part of the lead up, and those online practice rounds were judged by, I think the online practice rounds at this stage, because it was a pilot, were judged by debate people.
Okay.
But going forward, one of the things that we want to do is we want the online practice round component beforehand to be judged by people from your university who aren't associated with the debate program, or people from your college that aren't associated with the debate program. So probably what that would end up looking like is like each round would have 3 judges, and 2 of those judges would be academic experts, and 1 would be a debate person who would be in there and be like, well, from an argumentation theory standpoint, this is why this argument works or doesn't work. But that way students would get a full complement of feedback, and I think that's more robust.
When the academic judges are judging content, are they doing like fact checking?
So sometimes it depends.
Okay.
So students come to the round with citations that they bring with them, and there is some, in terms of format, they usually follow, there's really no solidified format for civic debating that everyone has to follow or every event has to follow. But most events have chosen to follow an adaptation of a policy debate format in which a debater gets up and gives a speech and then is cross-examined by the opposing team, by a member of the opposing team. And that person will do their best to fact check that person and to try to find the limits of their knowledge about their evidence. So they might ask them questions about how studies were conducted, why that methodology was the correct methodology, why they're not using either more up-to-date or more foundational studies to try to prove their point. And if a judge does ask and says, I would like to see that document, the debaters are expected to be able to provide that document to the judge so that they can make their determination. I, in fact, am judging one of the preliminary rounds in Bogota when I was there. I at the end of the round, I was like, who has a copy of the foundational text for this debate? Because I need to read the passage that you guys kept talking about so I can decide which one of you has the correct interpretation of that passage. Because I was like, I have not read that specific passage, or I don't remember it off the top of my head. So in order to determine which of you is getting closer to that, from my point of view, I have to read this. And when somebody handed me the book, pointed out the passage, and I made a determination. Yeah. Anything else? Solid. All right, y'all. Well, thanks for coming out.
It was really good.
We didn't have the largest group, but I hope that you learned something that was maybe of value. And if you're interested in doing any sort of debating type stuff, or helping to throw some debates on campus that are, led by college students instead of just faculty yammering at each other, I'd love to be involved.